Well, the first time I came to this conference was 1989. So it would have been the second conference out of the 29 years that it's been going on. And I basically just came as an interested person. I've been into UFO research ever since I was a teenager, field investigative work and things like that. So I basically came down here just to attend the conference. And it kind of launched, I guess, a speaking career. Shortly after that, Lou started looking for, one of the things that he always liked to do was to find new researchers to present their work that have never presented it anywhere before. So I got the opportunity to speak on some of the research I was doing, and became, I guess, a popular speaker. So I spoke at the conference for a number of years, and actually I think I've given presentations at maybe about 15 of them. And then whenever I didn't have anything to speak about, Lou would call me up and go, would you please come down and at least run the speakers panel for me? Because he didn't like basically being mean to people or, trying to, because like a speaker panel, you got to kind of shut people up sometimes, and keep it rolling. And so then that kind of evolved into an MC role, where he really didn't like getting up to the podium. And so slowly over time, I started kind of doing that role for him. And then whenever he, had to retire from the conference or whatever, I was, honored to be, asked to continue that tradition. So that's kind of how I became an MC. And so I actually like that role quite a bit also. Being a researcher and a presenter is fantastic, but being able to still be part of it and to talk about my colleagues that I have stories to tell and it, I don't know, it just makes it a fantastic experience. One of the opportunities is whenever you come to conferences like this, and even more so if you're involved as a speaker or staff or presenter, is you get to meet all of the researchers from all over the world. And so to meet these people and become colleagues and then be able to honor them with introductions at the conference. There's been some fantastic speakers, and we used to have a lot of international speakers. There were always God, now I'm trying to remember his name. Sorry, I should have thought of more names before we started. But like Timothy Good from England, very well-known researcher that's done a lot of fantastic investigations into the government and in Britain and in America. Linda Moulton Howe, of course, I think she's been at every one of them, except for maybe one, but maybe not. I think she might have been to every one. So being part of her experience. But one of the things that happens at conferences like this is, and the way I put this is that a lot of times the real UFO research is actually happening outside of the lecture hall in the hotel rooms. And because what happens is it's a chance for the researchers to get together where you may not, see your fellow researchers very much unless you're at a conference together, because we live all over the place. And so what happens is people tend to gravitate together into hotel rooms and they start sharing the data that they're not really talking about publicly yet. It's like the kind of the coolest cases that you're working on, and you start comparing notes and finding correlations and similarities. And some of the things that we wouldn't dare talk about publicly 15 years ago is now mainstream conversation, but we would whisper about it in the rooms. And if you were fortunate enough to follow along or be invited, to these meetings, it was a special experience. And one of those that I remember was a man named Lloyd Pye. He's now deceased. He's the Starchild guy. And he, before he was a speaker or anything, he was at this conference, and I happened to be walking back to the hotel room after my presentation, and Lloyd was towing about 6 people with him in the parking lot, and he goes, "Hey, Forrest, follow me, I got something cool to show you." 10 minutes later, I was holding the Starchild skull in my hand. It's like you never know what you're going to learn or what you're going to see or experience at a conference like this. But it's always something interesting like that. One of the experiences I had was with Nancy Talbot was here presenting on this new case that she was working on overseas. And it was this very special individual that had lots of strange phenomena happening around him that were also in association with the crop circles. And it was the first time that she had really shown this to anybody. And again, it was one of those, let's go back to Nancy's room, and she was pulling out all these pictures that nobody had ever seen and telling this guy's story, and just some of the strangest stuff that you've ever heard about. When they would take pictures, these weird images would show up in the pictures of faces and historical figures and all kinds of things like that. It was just, you feel like it's a part of history, kind of happened. Even though it's very few people know about it, it's still very special. Another speaker that I enjoyed that used to speak back in the 90s was George Wingfield. He's a crop circle expert from England, retired engineer, I believe, and he would come in and present about the crop circles, and a lot of activity happening in the 90s, so it was nice every year to have him come and speak, and you hear the latest and the greatest of what was going on with the crop circle research. Well, there was a year when he came to the conference, and he pulled up out front in a panel van, and I happened to be walking by, and he's like, "Hey, help us unload these pictures." And so I go over, and there was a guy with him that was older gentleman. Had on kind of a dirty T-shirt, I'm not attempting to insult the man, but he looked like he had been working in the yard and sweating for a while. Okay, and that's probably exactly what he was doing. They'd loaded the van, they'd driven down here from probably Springfield or someplace, and they were unloading these big framed pictures of crop circles out of the back of the van. So I helped them carry all of this in, and they brought, I don't know, dozens and dozens of these pictures and hung them up in a gallery out in the lecture hall. And they were, selling them and also just letting people appreciate the beauty of the crop circle pictures. And so I'm rubbing shoulders with this guy, and we're hanging pictures up and all this kind of stuff. And so George goes, at one point he looks and he goes, "Oh, hey, John, Forrest John." And introduces me to this guy that I've been working with, helping him with the pictures. Well, it turns out that the guy was John Haddington. Now, this is the Earl of Haddington. He lives in a castle in England. He's the Earl of Haddington, okay? He sits on Parliament, all right? He's real interested in all of this paranormal stuff and was a friend of George's, from England, very involved in the crop circle guys. Well, I'd heard of him. I'd never met the man. And here I am. This was just a special experience for me. Here I am sweating with the guy, hanging up crop circle pictures with him. Just the nicest guy you'd ever want to know. And it was just a very cool experience to meet him. And that's the kind of things that happen, at this place. One special experience that I had at this conference was very early on. I think it was 1990. And I was down here. I had come down to the conference and met Tom Stoltz, who was the Illinois State Director for MUFON at the time. I was the Assistant State Director. And we met down here at the conference and was hanging out. And I think it might have been Linda. Somebody grabbed us and said, "Listen, you need to go talk to this guy over here. He's got some interesting things to say that correlate with what you guys are doing." And so Tom and I went over and we sat down. We met this guy. I think he was from Brazil. And he was in the United States. As it turns out, he had fled his country after his parents had been killed by the government. And he had been out, he had been in the United States staying with an uncle, for the summer or something like that. And while he was up here, his parents were killed by the government. And he had had alien encounters for years and had a lot to say about it. Well, this started a lengthy multi-year relationship with this guy that involved, he basically was a contactee. And some of the weirdest stuff that I've experienced in the UFO field happened with that guy. And it all started by just a random meeting of him down here. He wasn't down here giving a presentation. He just came down with, some friends. And we got hooked up with this guy and researched his case for a number of years before he kind of moved on. But very, very strange things happen, including seeing UFOs when we were with him, seeing strange images like overlaid, over his body while we were interviewing him, physical phenomenon happening in the room, and like even the UFO sighting that I referred to, we were doing an interview session with him where he basically claimed the aliens were talking through him, so we were asking questions. When the session was over, he goes, "Would you like to see them? Or like to see their craft?" And we went, "Yeah." He says, "Well, go outside right now. They're up there in the sky." And we were in Downers Grove, Chicago, and we ran outside in the front yard of Tom's house, and we looked up in the sky, and there was a UFO right hovering above his head, like thousands of feet up, And while we watched it, it went and disappeared. So that's the kind of things that may happen at a conference like this. You just have these happen chance meetings, and then it takes you down some wonderful path, of learning and experiencing. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot more to that story, but that's like a whole nother, this is literally, I can tell, I don't care if you're recording this because this case is fairly well known, but the guy was probably a hybrid because there were a couple of instances where we witnessed things, like he had very strange physiology, and he told us about it. He has 2 heartbeats. He can't go to the hospital because when he goes to the hospital and they examine him, they freak out because his physiology is different. And Tom's dead now, but before Tom died, this guy actually lived with Tom for, I guess, about 8 or 10 months, and while we were doing this intense kind of investigation with him. And Tom saw him, he was shaving one morning, and he cut himself shaving. And what came out wasn't like a normal red blood, it was like a pink foam. And it wasn't shaving cream and blood. It was, he didn't have shaving cream on. It was like a pink foam when he cut himself. And then another time, Tom walked into the bathroom while he was Brazilian, so he had the dark hair and the complexion, but he had like green eyes. So, when you looked at him, there was that weirdness. You knew that wasn't he had contacts in, they colored his eyes. So Tom saw him one morning putting in one of his contacts, and he had slit pupils. His eyes looked like cat's eyes. And he would cover them up with blue contacts, or green contacts, blue contacts, anyway. Very strange shit, man. like the night that we did this thing where he says he can channel the aliens, basically, because they talk all the time like that. He says, but they can talk through me, and if you like, we can do a session and they'll answer your questions. Okay, not one to shy away from something strange. We sat in Tom's living room, and we turned off all the lights. He sat in a chair over here. Me and Tom's wife sat over here against the window, and Tom and this other researcher who was a Chippewa Ojibwe woman from the Bad River Indian Reservation, Wisconsin, was also doing the investigation. She's the one that gave me the Native American name Bluefeather. They were sitting over there. Judy and I were looking at this guy, and so he does his kind of little trance thing, and he starts talking to us. And shortly into the interview, so we would ask questions and they'd answer them. And shortly into the interview, we're looking at this guy. Now, it's low light. You could. There was enough light in the ambient light where you could take notes. Okay, but there were no lights on. So you could see him over there, but not, not clearly because it was kind of dark in the room. What ended up happening was this shimmering green glow started to appear over his face and upper torso. And it was like, it was as if you were shining this kind of pale, like a weird pale, almost like, like the light stick kind of green, this pale green glow, like you were projecting it over the top of him, because you could see it was like another face projected over his face. And you could even make out that there was like a uniform. And then, so I'm looking at this, and I'd seen this another time. That's a whole nother story. I'd seen this another time with another contactee. And I'm looking at this, and he's answering the questions, and then the faces started changing. It was as if you were like changing slides. The face would change, and they were different beings. And they all looked, human. But there's a female. There's a different male. And there were like 5 different crew members that were like, you could see their images just kind of flipping and changing as he was answering these questions. And so I'm like, Judy, are you seeing this? And she's like, yeah. And so we don't want to like break the mood. We're trying to let, Tom and Sharon, I think was this woman's name, trying to let them know what we're seeing. And we're kind of trying to signal them, and they're like, and we didn't really get to confirm until afterwards. And they were seeing it, but they were looking at him sideways. So what they were seeing was like a thin green light glowing in front of him. So it was like a projection that was coming from somewhere. And then when the session was over, he had actually told us ahead of time. He says, "Look, I'll need to drink a lot of water after I do this. It dehydrates me terribly, and what I want you to do is come up and feel my hair right now." And so before we started, we're all up rubbing his hair, and his hair was greasy. I mean, it was one of those like, dude. And so then we did this session for about 45 minutes, and the session ended. And he says, "Well, come up and feel my hair." And then when he kind of came out of it, he goes, "Come up and feel my hair." His hair was dry as straw. I mean, it was like just sitting there 45 minutes. There was no air blowing on this guy. Dry, oil gone. It was like, oh man, you need to put something in your hair. And that's while we're sitting there feeling his hair, and he goes, "Hey, they asked me if you guys want to see the craft." And we're like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay, we'll go outside right now." And so we all, like little children, ran out in the front yard to look up, and we're like, there's an extra star. It was like Orion was right there. There was a 4th star, like here's the belt, and then there's this bright, bluish white star right there. And we're going, that's not supposed to be there. And then it goes like that and disappears. Well, this year being the 29th year of the conference, this is probably the best list of speakers that we've ever had. Even though there were always great speakers here, you kind of end up having like one headliner, or maybe 2, and then you have some new researchers or people who don't speak that often. And so there was always a blend of that. But this particular year, I think the speaking list is the strongest that it's ever been. I mean, we've got like 4 people on the docket that could be headliners at any conference in the world, and they're all here the same weekend. So it just, I don't think anybody's going to be able to walk away and say that this wasn't like maybe the best conference they've ever been to. Seriously, we've got Whitley Strieber here, responsible for publishing the book Communion, which changed tens of thousands of people's lives just because of the picture on the cover. He, solely responsible for bringing abduction research into the mainstream media and opening people up to it. And his experiences are ongoing and extraordinary. He's one of the speakers. Jim Mars, as New York Times best-selling author, many times over, wrote the book that was made into the movie JFK. I mean, just these fantastic backgrounds. One of the best conspiracy researchers, in the business. Just a fantastic, guy. Eric von Daniken. This guy literally is. He is the ancient astronaut guy. There's, he is the shoulders on which all other ancient astronaut researchers have to stand. He started the whole thing. And in my experience with him, the first book that he wrote was Chariots of the Gods. It was the first book on UFOs or aliens that I ever read back in like 1968, or I guess it was about 1970, 1971. It started the whole thing for me. I just ate through that book like it was food. It was just fantastic, and it just, sparked me on. By the time I was 13 years old, I had 200 books on the subject, and it all started with that guy and the questions that he asked and pointed out to the whole world that we probably got our ancient history wrong. He's here to talk. I mean, it's just, he speaks all over the world at universities. Just a fantastic person to have on the docket. Linda Moulton Howe, of course. It's one of those, like, she's been here every year. I don't even know where to start talking about her. It's just this incredible journalistic background, professional speaker, investigator, just tenacious researcher, going from one unexplainable topic to the next and bringing it to the world to understand. Another one of the speaker that opened the conference this year and won the award for the Lou Farish Lifetime Achievement Award in ufology is Dave Marler, and he's one of these guys. He's a very dear friend of mine, and he's probably the best field investigator or researcher I've ever worked with personally. Just meticulous, detailed, drives for the truth and the facts. And he's really just kind of coming of age as a researcher, getting the respect and the attention that he deserves. And is an expert, has become in a very short time an expert on triangle UFOs. So, even with David not being a world, renowned speaker, that's just a matter of time, So it's, this year is going to be probably the best year ever. Yes, one of the other speakers this year is Nick Pope, and he's a very nice, kind of understated guy, basically a British gentleman, and his claim to fame is probably greater than most people in the business, really, and that is that he, for over 20 years he worked for the Ministry of Defense in Britain as the guy dealing with their UFO reports. So he literally is the Fox Mulder of England. And so he was as inside really as you can possibly get, short of, being in the underground bunkers working on the crazy stuff maybe, but, seeing all of this and dealing with it in real time, and now being able to publicly speak about it and to write about it, and just a very, very polished professional speaker with tons of knowledge, a great speaker to have on the docket. Well, if you've never been to a UFO conference before, let's say, and you're trying to decide which one to go to kind of jump into the science and learn about it, there are a few that I would highly recommend. This is one of them. This has always been my favorite conference of all of the ones that I've attended or presented at over the years. There's something special about this conference. Part of it was because of the genuine nature that Lou Farish brought to this conference, just the way his intent was to put the best speakers and the newest speakers that he could. He wasn't worried about making a lot of money off of it. Basically, if one year paid for the next, that was fine. And it was just, he devoted his life to this conference and to this subject, and to create a platform where people could come together and share their research and their information. Now, it's situated in, Eureka Springs, Arkansas, which is not near any major cities or hubs in the world. So you'd think, well, if you really wanted a successful UFO conference, put it near a big city, okay? But he lived nearby here. He didn't want to do that. And Eureka Springs is just this fantastic, like, artistic, creative, spiritual place in the middle of the Ozark Mountains. It's just gorgeous. You put those two things together and you have a magical experience. Not only are you getting a high-quality conference and information, but then you have this just idyllic setting. And there's no other conference out there like it. There just really isn't. So this would be the conference I would recommend that you come to first, and you'll get hooked, and you'll come back every year like many, many people. There were, up until Lou's passing, the crowd that was here, if you ask people for a show of hands of who had been here for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, you would find out that there were about 200 to 300 people that came every year for 10 years, 12 years. And that's a good thing if you think about it, like devoted to this conference, just loved the conference. And I would come down every year, wouldn't miss it, would reserve their hotel room before they left the conference for the next year, kind of thing. What is good about what is happening now is the tables have almost completely turned, where we have only maybe about 10% of repeats, or I should say people who were amongst that original family, I guess. And now the conference is filled with almost all new people, which is fantastic. So I think that speaks to the testament of what the conference is really all about, and that it is kept going to the point where now we have a whole new generation of people coming to the conference, which is fantastic. That means it will probably live on for a long time.